The year is 1888, and the emperor in Beijing addresses the Global Assembly of Nations via instantaneous photophone, its images projected onto screens in London, Paris, and a hesitant Washington. Steam-powered automatons, not human hands, harvest rice across the vast plains of the southern Song province, their designs licensed from the Imperial Institute of Mechanical Wonders. European scholars petitioned for entry into the grand academies of Nanjing, hoping to learn the secrets of Li dynamics that power the silent, hovering sky lanterns used for transcontinental travel. Imagine a world where the first locomotives thundered, not through the English countryside but along the ancient Silk Road, powered by Chinese ingenuity. Picture this. By 1850, the largest, most advanced city in the world wasn't London or Paris, but a sprawling, steam-powered Nanjing, its skies crisscrossed by experimental flying machines. Number 9. The Silk-Steel Imperium. Imagine a world where the clatter of automated looms and the hiss of steam engines first echoed, not in Manchester, but in Suzhou. This is the reality of the Silk-Steel Imperium. It began subtly, around the early 1700s. The Daima emperors, instead of becoming wary of innovation, saw it as a path to strengthen the realm. Imperial decrees encouraged the study of mechanics and metallurgy, drawing upon centuries of Chinese advancements often overlooked by Western historians. The first significant breakthrough was the Dragon's Lung steam engine, initially designed by court artisans to improve irrigation along the Yellow River. Its efficiency far surpassed early Western designs. By 1760, these engines were adapted for textile manufacturing. Vast factories, employing tens of thousands, sprang up in the Yangtze Delta. Silk and cotton production exploded, but not just in quantity. Quality maintained by intricate steam-powered machinery was unparalleled. Chinese textiles flooded global markets, not as luxury goods for the elite, but as affordable, high-quality fabrics for everyone. European textile makers, still reliant on hand looms or rudimentary water frames, simply couldn't compete. The next leap was transport. The Grand Canal, already an engineering marvel, was deepened and widened. Fleets of steam-powered barges, belching smoke from their dragon-headed funnels, transported raw materials and finished goods with astonishing speed. The Iron Serpents, as they were called, first connected Beijing to the southern manufacturing hubs by 1795. These weren't rickety, experimental lines. They were robust, double-track railways capable of carrying immense loads. Imperial engineers, driven by the need to manage a vast empire, perfected rail technology rapidly. By 1820, a transcontinental railway stretched from eastern China across Central Asia, effectively reviving the Silk Road with steel and steam. Goods, information, and imperial influence flowed along these arteries. European powers, witnessing this economic juggernaut, found themselves in a peculiar position. Instead of dictating terms of trade, they became eager customers and often debtors. The global financial center wasn't London, it was Shanghai. Chinese merchant banks, backed by the imperial treasury, issued loans and set exchange rates. This wasn't a military empire in the traditional sense, at least not initially. Its dominance was built on economic might. Chinese engineers and merchants established trading posts and development zones across Southeast Asia, Africa, and even parts of Europe. These weren't colonies taken by force, but rather economic enclaves invited by local rulers eager for access to Chinese technology and capital. The world ran on Chinese standards, from railway gauges to currency. The global language of commerce became Mandarin, not English. This Silk-Steel Imperium didn't need to conquer with armies. It reshaped the world with its goods, its railways, and its overflowing coffers. The flow of silver, which once went into China for tea and silk, now poured outwards as China invested in and developed global resources for its ever-hungry industries. Number 8. The Dragon's Alavat. Forget silicon chips for a moment. Think intricate brass and bamboo. In this timeline, the foundations of the information age were laid in the Imperial Forbidden City, not in a Californian garage. The spark ignited with a renewed interest in the sophisticated mechanical calculators and astronomical clocks of the Song dynasty. Emperor Qing, in a moment of inspiration around 1750, commissioned his finest clockmakers and mathematicians to create a celestial harmony engine, a device capable of predicting eclipses, tides, and even, it was whispered, the flow of markets. This wasn't just a fancy abacus. Used a binary system inspired by the I Ching's hexagrams and was powered by precisely engineered water wheels and, later, small refined steam engines. By 1780, the Dragon's Alavat engine Mark I occupied an entire hall in the Imperial Palace. Primary function was statecraft, census data, tax collection, resource allocation across the vast empire. The efficiency gains were staggering. Bureaucratic processes that once took months were completed in days. The implications quickly spread beyond government. Imperial scholars, who in this world were as much engineers as they were philosophers, began to see the potential. Difference engines and analytical looms machines that could perform complex calculations and weave intricate patterns based on programmable instruction sets were developed in imperial workshops by the turn of the 19th century. These weren't widespread public tools yet, but crucial instruments of state and high-level industry. The military was an early adopter. Imagine naval cannons aimed with mechanical parfighters, or logistical chains for armies thousands of miles long managed by centralized analytical engines. Chinese military planning achieved a level of precision and foresight previously unimaginable. By 1830, the Imperial Telegraph Administration, using coded messages processed by these thinking machines, coordinated activities across the empire and its burgeoning global trade network. Messages that took weeks by courier now took hours. This early form of information technology created a highly efficient, centrally controlled state. Data became the most valuable commodity. The Imperial archives in Beijing didn't just store scrolls. They housed vast libraries of punch cards and brass cylinders containing the coded essence of the empire's knowledge and operations. European visitors in the mid-1800s, expecting a quaint, tradition-bound Orient, were instead met with a society where decisions were increasingly data-driven, where census takers used portable calculating devices, and where the flow of goods on the Grand Canal was unimpeded by a central analytical hub. This wasn't a world of personal computers, not yet, but it was a world where the state wielded the power of computation on an industrial scale. Social organization, economic planning, and even philosophical inquiry began to be shaped by this algorithmic thinking. The Dragon's Alavat didn't just calculate. It began to subtly reshape how an entire civilization perceived and managed its world, giving China an unprecedented edge in organization and foresight, long before electricity was even a common curiosity elsewhere. The world watched, puzzled and a little intimidated, as China seemed to operate with an almost pre-cognate efficiency. Number 7. The Great Fleet's New World. Admiral Plishke. His voyages in the early 15th century were a historical marvel. In our timeline, they were a magnificent dead end. But what if they weren't? What if, spurred by a different imperial faction or a sudden external threat, China not only continued these expeditions but industrialized its shipbuilding? This scenario sees the Industrial Revolution begin in the shipyards of Nanjing and Guangzhou around 1720. Catalyst was a new understanding of metallurgy and steam power, initially applied to create larger, more efficient pumps for dry docks, and then, fatefully, to power ships. The first fire junks, massive ocean-going vessels with reinforced hulls and steam-driven paddle wheels, later propellers, were launched by 1750. These ships were not the graceful treasure junks of old. They were behemoths, capable of carrying thousands of tons of cargo or hundreds of cannons. While Europe was still perfecting its wooden ships of the line, China was building ironclads. The Imperial Navy, the Great Fleet, became an unstoppable force. Its primary mission wasn't conquest, at least not initially, but securing trade routes and exploring new territories for resources and markets for China's burgeoning industries. Imagine Chinese steam frigates, not British ones, charting the Pacific, the Indian Ocean, and then the Atlantic. By 1800, Chinese mapping expeditions had reached the Americas, not as conquerors like the Spanish, but as traders and scientists, backed by overwhelming naval power. They established well-fortified trading posts along the coasts of California, Peru, and Brazil. These weren't colonies in the European sense of mass settlement and subjugation. They were more like Hong Kong or Mako in our timeline, but on a global scale, sovereign Chinese ports of trade and naval bases established through treaties, often signed under the silent persuasion of a nearby fleet of fire junks. The impact on the New World was profound. Indigenous populations, instead of facing European conquistadors, encountered Chinese merchants offering manufactured goods, tools, and agricultural technology in exchange for raw materials. While disease still took a toll, the dynamic was different. There was no wholesale enslavement or cultural destruction on the scale of the Spanish conquest. Instead, a complex web of trade and tributary relationships emerged, with local chieftains and kingdoms often maintaining their autonomy while becoming integrated into the Chinese economic sphere. By 1850, the Pacific Ocean was often referred to as the Chinese Lake. Fleets patrolled established sea lanes, linking the Chinese mainland to its network of global outposts. Chinese settlers, mostly merchants, engineers, and administrators, were present in these enclaves, but not in overwhelming numbers. The global flow of goods was reoriented. Silver from the Americas flowed to China, not through European intermediaries, but directly. New crops and resources from around the world enriched China, further fueling its industrial expansion. European nations, with their comparatively primitive navies, found themselves largely confined to the Atlantic, looking on as China defined the terms of global maritime trade and exploration. The great cities of this new world might have names like New Nanjing on the Californian coast or Southern Peaceport in Argentina, their architecture a blend of local styles and Chinese design, all under the watchful eye of the Dragon Throne's distant but ever-present Great Fleet. Number 6. The Mandarin Script Initiative. Imagine a world where walking down the main street of Paris, Berlin, or even New York in 1900, the prominent signs were not just in French, German, or English, but also, and often more grandly, in Mandarin Chinese. This is the outcome of the Mandarin Script Initiative, a world where China's early industrialization was intrinsically linked with a massive cultural and linguistic exportation project. It began not with a conscious desire to supplant other languages, but as a practical necessity. As Chinese manufactured goods, technological innovations, and business practices started to dominate global markets from the late 1700s onwards, understanding Chinese became essential for international trade. The imperial court, under a reform-minded emperor, recognized this. Around 1780, the Bureau for the Promotion of Celestial Language was established. its mission to standardize and simplify aspects of written Chinese for foreigners and to create effective teaching methodologies. The first wave was driven by commerce. Foreign merchants eager to trade with the industrial powerhouse of China flocked to newly established language schools in Canton, Shanghai, and Beijing. Chinese trading houses, setting up branches overseas, naturally used Mandarin for their internal operations and increasingly for local dealings. Manuals for Chinese-made machinery from steam engines to automated textile looms were initially only available in Chinese. To use the best technology, you had to learn the language. Then came the educational push. By the early 1800s, the most advanced scientific and engineering texts were being published in Chinese. The imperial academies in China became the world's leading centers of learning, much like European universities in our timeline. Scholars from across the globe sought admission, and a working knowledge of Mandarin was a prerequisite. The Chinese government, seeing the soft power benefits, began funding Confucius Institute's centers for Chinese language and culture in major cities worldwide. These weren't just language schools. They offered courses in Chinese history, philosophy, art, and science. The adoption of Chinese characters, or a simplified Pinyin, like Romanization system, developed in China for international use, began to appear in foreign contexts. International treaties, scientific papers, and even popular literature in other countries started to include Chinese summaries or key terms. The sheer volume of Chinese technical and cultural output meant that translation efforts couldn't keep up pushing more people to learn the source language. By 1870, Mandarin was the lingua franca of global science, technology, and high finance. Major international conferences were conducted primarily in Chinese, with other languages requiring simultaneous translation. Elite schools in Europe and the Americas made Mandarin a compulsory subject. While local languages certainly didn't disappear, anyone with ambitions on the global stage needed to be proficient in Chinese. Literary Chinese, with its rich history, also experienced a renaissance, influencing global literature and poetry. The world didn't just buy Chinese goods. It increasingly thought, innovated, and communicated using the framework of the Chinese language. Philosophical concepts from Confucianism and Taoism, transmitted through this linguistic dominance, began to subtly influence global ethical and social thought, creating a very different cultural landscape by the dawn of the 20th century. Number 5. The Harmonious Engine's Decree. What if the Industrial Revolution, born in China, took a different ethical and environmental path? This scenario explores the harmonious engine, where early industrial development, perhaps guided by Taoist and Neo-Confucian principles, emphasizing balance with nature and societal well-being, evolved differently than the often rapacious industrialization. The divergence point is subtle, rooted in the philosophical underpinnings of the Dengan dynasty's reformers around 1730. While embracing technological advancement for national strength, there was a concurrent emphasis on Tianren Hei, harmony between heaven, nature, and humanity. Early factory designs, for instance, incorporated principles of feng shui, not just for auspiciousness but for worker well-being and minimizing local environmental disruption. The first steam engines were often designed to burn cleaner fuels, or their emissions were channeled through elaborate filtering systems inspired by traditional alchemy and herbology, attempting to purify the smoke. This didn't mean no pollution, but there was a conscious state-sponsored effort to mitigate the worst excesses. Imperial decrees, the Harmonious Engine decrees, set standards for waste disposal from mines and factories far earlier than in OTL. There was significant investment in understanding and managing river systems, not just for transport, but to prevent the kindling of angry dragons, meaning ecological disasters, through industrial runoff. Urban planning in rapidly growing industrial cities like Wuhan or Tianjin incorporated large green spaces, communal gardens, and systems for recycling waste, drawing on age-old peasant thrift and resourcefulness now scaled up. The impact on labor was also different. While factory work was still demanding, the Confucian emphasis on social hierarchy and reciprocal obligation led to a form of paternalistic capitalism. Factory owners were often seen as having a responsibility for their workers' welfare beyond just wages. This translated into company-provided housing, though basic, healthcare using a mix of traditional and new Western, which in this timeline would be Eastern Tornadi medical techniques, and even schools for workers' children. Worker productivity was linked not just to discipline but to a sense of belonging and fair treatment, however imperfectly realized. There were still strikes and unrest, but perhaps less of the brutal class warfare seen in early European industrialization. Globally, this harmonious engine model became China's unique selling proposition. As Chinese industrial goods and technologies spread from the late 1700s, so did its consultants on balanced development. Nations eager to industrialize sought Chinese expertise, not just on building factories, but on how to do so with less social upheaval and environmental damage. China became a leader in what we might call sustainable development, centuries ahead of its time. Its global dominance wasn't just economic or military, it was ideological. It offered a compelling alternative model of progress, one that purported to blend modernity with tradition, efficiency with ecological mindfulness, and industrial might with social cohesion. By 1880, international conferences were held in Beijing to discuss global harmony principles for industrial expansion. While critics might point to the authoritarian aspects of the Chinese state that enforced these measures, or argue that the harmony was often superficial, the visible difference in the environmental quality of Chinese industrial cities compared to, say, a hypothetical, rapidly industrializing London attempting to catch up was stark. The world looked to China not just for what to build, but how to build it in a way that theoretically kept the dragons of imbalance and destruction at bay. Number 4. The Jade Warlords Ascendant. Not all paths of industrial dominance are paved with peaceful trade or philosophical ideals. This scenario imagines a China where early industrialization, beginning around 1700, fuels a far more militaristic and expansionist Qing dynasty, or perhaps a successor dynasty, that seizes power through its mastery of new weaponry. Here, the first steam engines are not primarily for textiles, but for forging cannons, powering warships, and equipping vast, modernized armies. The Jade Warlords' powerful generals and court factions see technology as the ultimate tool for projecting power and fulfilling a more aggressive interpretation of the mandate of heaven. The shift begins with border anxieties. Perhaps intensified pressures from restive Central Asian peoples or perceived threats from a nascent Russian Empire spur the Tizam court to heavily invest in military technology. Imperial arsenals in cities like Xinyang and Xi'an become centers of innovation, churning out standardized breech-loading rifles, powerful artillery pieces, forged from superior steel, and by 1760 steam-powered armored river gunboats that quickly pacify internal waterways and project power into neighboring terraways. The first major test comes in Central Asia. Campaigns that in our timeline were long, arduous affairs are concluded with shocking speed and decisiveness. Chinese armies, supplied by nascent railways and equipped with superior firepower, crush nomadic confederations and extend Anzapon control deep into the steppes. This success emboldens the militarist factions at court. The focus shifts from internal consolidation to external expansion. By the early 1800s, this industrialized Chinese military machine turns its attention southwards and eastwards. Vietnam, Burma, and Siam are brought into the imperial fold, not as tributary states in the old sense, but as directly administered provinces or tightly controlled protectorates. Resistance is met with overwhelming force. Chinese ironclad fleets developed from the 1780s onwards dominate the South China Sea and project power into the Indian Ocean. European trading posts in Southeast Asia are either absorbed or reduced to insignificant enclaves, permitted to exist only at the emperor's sufferance. The impact on India is as China's industrial hunger for resources grows, its gaze falls upon the subcontinent. Instead of a British Raj, a Chinese Yindu protectorate, Yindu being a Chinese name for India, is established by the mid-19th century, with Chinese governors, engineers, and armies reshaping the region to serve the Adyssum Empire's needs. Cotton, jute, and minerals flow north and east. This isn't a world of subtle economic or cultural influence. It's a world reshaped by the dragon's claw. Chinese military academies become the most prestigious in the world, training officers from allied or subjugated states in the art of industrialized warfare. The Adyssum Empire, or its successor, directly rules over a vast swathe of Asia, from the Pacific to the Caspian Sea, from Siberia to the Indian Ocean. European powers, disunited and technologically lacking, are forced into a defensive posture, their colonial ambitions elsewhere curtailed or preempted by Chinese expansion. Whispers in the courts of Europe speak fearfully of the Jade Terror, and cartographers redraw maps of the world with a colossal, ever-expanding Chinese empire at its heart. The balance of global power is not just tilted. It's fundamentally overturned by the might of the Jade warlords and their steam-powered legions. Number 3. The Divided Sky Heresy. What if the Industrial Revolution, instead of strengthening the central Chinese state, actually shattered it? This scenario, dubbed the Divided Sky Heresy by imperial loyalists, posits that the rapid, uneven industrialization starting in different regions of China around the mid-1700s empowers local governors, merchant guilds, and even ambitious imperial court in Beijing. The seeds of division are sown by geography and resources. Perhaps the southern provinces around Guangzhou, with their strong maritime traditions and early access to new rice strains, develop a trade focused outward-looking industrial base powered by imported coal and imitive water wheel factories. Meanwhile, the Yangtze Delta region, around Nanjing and Shanghai, leverages its existing silk and cotton industries, rapidly mechanizing with locally developed steam engines. In the north, near the coal and iron deposits of Manchuria, a heavy industry focused on metallurgy and armaments arises, perhaps driven by a defensively minded local military commander. The Dizam court, initially encouraging these developments, finds itself unable to control them. Localized industrial booms create immense wealth and power for regional elites. These new industrial magnates and provincial governors begin to resist Beijing's edicts, first subtly by delaying tax remittances or selectively enforcing imperial laws, then more overtly. They raise their own modernized militias to protect their factories and trade routes, equipped with weapons from their own regional armories. By the late 1700s or early 1800s, China is no longer a monolithic empire. It has fractured into several powerful competing industrialized states. Perhaps a southern Canton Republic, a Yangtze economic combine, a northern iron hegemony, and a rump imperial domain around Beijing, struggling to maintain relevance. This isn't a return to the warring states period of antiquity in terms of chaos, but a new era of dynamic, often tense, multipolarity within China. Each of these Chinese states vies for global influence. Canton Republic, with its powerful merchant fleet, might establish trading posts across Southeast Asia and even in the Americas, competing fiercely with the Yangtze Combine, which focuses on high-quality Manyan subcontinent. The northern hegemony might engage in expansionism in Central Asia or Siberia. Its powerful land armies, a constant threat. The divided sky means that Chinese dominance is not singular but multifaceted and competitive. Foreign powers find themselves navigating a complex landscape, playing one Chinese state against another, or being forced to choose sides in their commercial dealings. Technological innovation is rapid, driven by intense rivalry between these Chinese entities. Espionage and counter-espionage for industrial secrets are rampant. One Chinese state might pioneer advanced steam turbines, while another perfects early electrical generation, each jealously guarding its breakthroughs. The world still feels the immense impact of Chinese industrial might, but it's a fragmented, often contradictory force. There's no single China dictating global terms, but rather a collection of powerful, industrialized Chinese nations, each with its own agenda, its own strengths, and its own vision for its place in the world. This internal Chinese competition, while potentially destabilizing, also fuels an incredible dynamism, ensuring that Chinese innovation and industrial output in its various forms still largely overshadows the rest of the world, which struggles to keep up with any one of these dynamic dragon states, let alone all of them. Number 2. The Western Echo Chamber. In this version of history, China's Industrial Revolution, exploding onto the world stage from the mid-1700s, is so swift, so comprehensive, and so overwhelming that the West Europe and the fledgling United States never truly gets a chance to initiate its own. Instead, these nations become reactive, imitative, and ultimately subordinate entities in a China-centric global system. The world becomes an echo chamber for Chinese innovation. First shock waves hit Europe around 1770. Chinese merchants, backed by advanced manufacturing and efficient steam-powered shipping, flood European markets with goods of superior quality and lower price than anything local artisans or early factories can produce. Textiles, ceramics, metalware, even complex mechanical devices like clocks and scientific instruments, all made in the Great Tangkang. Local industries across Europe wither. Guilds protest. Governments attempt tariffs, but the tide is too strong. Desperate to understand and recruit this success, European monarchs and merchants send envoys, scholars, and spies to China. They return with tales of vast, orderly factories, powerful steam engines, and a society deeply committed to practical science and engineering. The initial response is a frantic attempt at imitation. Schools of Eastern learning pop up in London, Paris, and Berlin, dedicated to translating Chinese technical manuals and understanding Confucian work ethics. Aspiring European engineers dream of apprenticeships in Nanjing or Hangzhou, not the other way around. However, catching up proves immensely difficult. China has a decades-long head start, a vast domestic market that fuels innovation, and a centralized state that strategically directs industrial development. European attempts at building their own steam engines or power looms are often clumsy copies of Chinese designs, reliant on imported Chinese components or advisors. The Industrial Revolution in Europe, if it can be called that, is more of an industrial reception, a process of adopting and adapting Chinese technologies, always a step or two behind. By 1830, the economic disparity is stark. Major European cities have Chinese quarters that are not enclaves of immigrants, but bustling commercial districts dominated by Chinese banks, trading houses, and showrooms, displaying the latest marvels from the East. European nations compete with each other for favorable trade agreements with China, for access to its technology licenses, and for investment from Chinese mercantile corporations. The United States, in this timeline, develops primarily as a supplier of raw materials, cotton, timber, minerals, for Chinese industries, its own manufacturing ambitions, largely stifled by the flood of superior Chinese goods. Cultural influence follows economic dominance. Chinese fashion, philosophy, and aesthetics become globally influential. European yidists adopt Chinese styles of dress, study Confucian classics for insights into good governance and social harmony, and collect Chinese art and technological marvels. The intellectual currents of the Enlightenment still exist, but they are increasingly in dialogue with and often overshadowed by Eastern thought. The world looks to Beijing, not London or Paris, for the latest trends, the newest ideas, and the direction of future progress. The West, instead of shaping the modern world, becomes a vast echo chamber, reflecting the brilliance and power of an industrialized China. Its own unique voice is muted, its destiny largely shaped by decisions made thousands of miles away in the Forbidden City. Number 1. The Celestial Mandate Universal. Imagine a world where the dominant political ideology, the very framework for international relations, is not based on Westphalian sovereignty or Enlightenment ideals, but on an industrialized and globally projected version of China's Mandate of Heaven Tianming and the concept of all under heaven Tianxia. This is the scenario where China's early industrial supremacy, achieved by the late 1700s, is coupled with a profound philosophical confidence that reshapes global governance itself. As China's economic and technological power became undeniable by 1800, its intellectuals and reformist officials began to articulate a new vision for world order. They argued that the emperor, as the son of heaven, had a responsibility not just for the welfare of the Chinese people, but for the peace and prosperity of all peoples under heaven. This wasn't necessarily a call for direct conquest of the entire world, but for a hierarchical system, where other nations acknowledge China's leading role and subscribe to a set of universal principles derived from Confucian ethics, principles of harmony, order, reciprocal obligation, and righteous governance. The instruments of this new world order were initially economic and technological. China established harmonious development banks that offered infrastructure, loans, and technological aid to other nations, contingent on their adherence to celestial principles, fair labor practices, as defined by Chinese standards, investment in education, and stable, non-aggressive foreign policies. Nations that aligned with these principles received preferential trade status, access to advanced Chinese technology, and even security assistance from China's modernized military to maintain internal order. By 1850, a global assembly of tributary states, though the term tributary was diplomatically softened to harmonious partners, convened regularly in Beijing. Here, disputes between nations were mediated by imperial envoys, international standards for trade and technology were set, and collaborative projects such as global telegraph networks or international scientific expeditions were launched under Chinese leadership. European nations, Japan, the Ottoman Empire, and emerging states in the Americas all sent representatives recognizing, whether willingly or pragmatically, the benefits of participating in this China-led system. The Celestial Mandate was not always imposed by force, though China's overwhelming industrial and military might served as a powerful backdrop. More often, it spread through influence and the undeniable success of the Chinese model. Rulers in other countries seeking stability and prosperity began to adopt Chinese administrative techniques, legal codes, and educational systems. Confucian academies, sponsored by the imperial court, became influential in foreign capitals, training a generation of international scholar officials imbued with celestial principles. This system wasn't without its challenges. Some nations chafed under Chinese hegemony, viewing the Celestial Mandate Universal as a gilded cage. Rebellions or attempts to form counter-alliances were met with swift economic sanctions, or in rare cases, pacification campaigns by the technologically superior imperial forces. However, for many, the order and predictability offered by the China-centric world were preferable to the constant warfare and competition that characterized previous eras. By the early 20th century, the world was interconnected and relatively peaceful, but it was a peace largely defined and maintained by the Dragon Throne. The emperor in Beijing was not just the ruler of China, but the de facto arbiter of global affairs, his decrees shaping the destiny of nations under a universally proclaimed, if not universally beloved, celestial mandate.